In Alabama, they want to get the 10 Commandments up in like all public places. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because Alabama is kind of special when it comes to the 10 Commandments. It has a weird history. Do you all remember Roy Moore, the dude from Alabama? So if you're not old like me, you may you may not be aware of this, but before he was a Senate candidate who got in big trouble for reasons, Roy Moore was the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, and I was shocked by this. In 2001, Roy Moore, this conservative Christian, is like, I'm going to move a giant 10 Commandments monument into the Supreme Court of Alabama. And he knew no one would be on board with this, so he did it in the middle of the night. And it was a whole thing, and it was super controversial. And when he was told to remove it, he was like, no. And then they were like, well, there's a court injunction for you to remove this giant monument. And he's like, who cares what the law says? I'm a Supreme Court justice. He just wasn't going to do it. And then the 8 other Supreme Court justices on the Alabama Supreme Court, they ruled that the monument had to be booted out of their building. And then not long after that, Roy Moore was removed from his seat as Chief Justice altogether. That was in like 2001 and shortly thereafter. Now, in 2012, he decided to run again to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he won. And that was dumb. But hey, Alabama voters for you. And then when was it, 2016 or 18, when he ran for Senate, thinking he's on top of the world. No one's going to stop him. They love him in Alabama. And then he was outed as a child sex predator. So there's that. But that's Alabama's famous history with the 10 Commandments monument. And then in 2018, because Roy Moore's stunt never worked, the Republicans in the state said, since this is all unconstitutional, why don't we just try to change the Constitution? And we will just try to pass an amendment to our state constitution that allows displays of the 10 Commandments on public property, including schools. And they put it to voters. And guess what happened then in 2018? And your hint is Alabama voters. This is 2018. This is what happened. They voted yes. 72% of voters said, yeah, we want the 10 Commandments on public property. Let's change the Constitution to do that. So that's disturbing. Now, it was a kind of pointless amendment, though, because while it allowed schools and courthouses to put up 10 Commandments displays, it's still illegal to do that at a national level. And guess what happens? If, let's say, a public school put up a 10 Commandments monument, they would get sued over it. They would have to fight that in court. And let's say anyone cared about legal precedent anymore. I know that's questionable, but if they did, that would be ruled illegal. And all that litigation costs money. And who's going to pay for that, for all those legal battles? The state wasn't going to pay for them. So even though the law now said you could totally put up a 10 Commandments monument, everyone knew that it's still illegal to do it at a national level, so you can't actually do that. So even that constitutional amendment didn't do anything. So why do I bring that up? Because this week, 22 Republicans in the Alabama legislature, led by a guy named Mark Gidley, they filed House Bill 178, which would force schools to display the 10 Commandments. And they're basically imitating the law that was passed in Louisiana. But as all of you probably know by now, that law to force schools to post the 10 Commandments in classrooms, a federal judge has already declared it unconstitutional, and the state of Louisiana is trying to get it up to the Supreme Court. So they're appealing that decision. They want the Supreme Court to say it's totally fine, whatever. But here's what the bill says that Alabama Republicans are trying to pass. It would create a new law requiring school boards to display the 10 Commandments in each school under its jurisdiction by January 1st of 2026. They want the displays to go up at the entrance to schools or other common areas like the school library, which was a surprise to me because I did not know Alabama schools had libraries. And it even tells them what wording they have to include on all of these displays. They're like, this is the bill. You have to include these words on the Ten Commandments monument. And then here's where it gets really annoying. The bill says that when you put up your Ten Commandments monument, you also have to include the following disclaimer: the history of the Ten Commandments in American public education. And if you're wondering why they're doing this, before I talk about this, the argument several decades ago is that you can't promote Christianity through the government. That's what's illegal. That's why you can't put up a standalone Ten Commandments monument. And the right wing's argument now is, yeah, that's how they used to rule on things. But this Supreme Court says those rules no longer apply. And that even if you're promoting Christianity, but it's been done for a long time, in addition, like a giant cross war memorial that's been around for 100 years, can the government have a giant cross war memorial? And the argument the Supreme Court gives is, well, it's been around for a long time, so even if it is promoting Christianity, who cares? So now they're trying to say that all of their attempts to promote Christianity are really historical in nature. So this is what this bill says. You have to include this disclaimer with the Ten Commandments monument, the history of the Ten Commandments in public education. And this goes on for a while. I don't know who's going to read any of this, but the Ten Commandments were a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries. Around 1688, the New England Primer became the first published American textbook, yada, yada, yada. It was used in public schools for more than 150 years, and it contained more than 40 questions about the Ten Commandments. Then it says, what about the McGuffey reader? That was used by a lot of people in the early 1800s. It sold more than 100 million copies. They don't actually say this had anything to do with the Ten Commandments, but there's like a brief mention of the Ten Commandments in some of those McGuffey readers. Then it says, the Ten Commandments also appeared in textbooks published by Noah Webster, which they used to use in schools way back in the day. In fact, in his textbook, the American Spelling Book, it included the Ten Commandments. Like, listen, man, I've taken spelling class. They include a lot of words. None of them are endorsements. But anyway, that's the disclaimer you got to use. And apparently there are some school districts that still had that book around in 1975. So the whole argument here is the Ten Commandments have been part of our tradition and history for decades. Now, this is the same disclaimer they used in Louisiana. All of it is bullshit. So that New England Primer they brought up, that was used almost exclusively in religious schools long before the rise of public education. The McGuffey readers, yeah, they included a story about the Ten Commandments, but a lot of the other editions of the book did not. And there are all kinds of reasons all of those books went out of style over the past century. So what the hell are we doing here? If the best evidence you have of the Ten Commandments in schools is, well, religious schools used them before we had, public schools or non-white people in our classes, that seems like you're not really helping your case. In fact, in Louisiana, when lawyers on the church-state separation side said, hey, judge, you need to strike down this law, they actually said there is no evidence of a long-standing, let alone unbroken, historical acceptance and practice of widespread, permanent displays of the Ten Commandments in public schools. So this is the only history they have, though, which is weird because the Ten Commandments were not even significant in the books that they are citing. They were not prominent. They were not in public schools. They were not outside the buildings or on the walls of the classrooms. So I don't get what the purpose of that disclaimer is. It doesn't help their case. Here's another interesting thing about this bill. It also says that you let me show you this. This is also hilarious. Look at letter C. A local board of education may also display the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence, and the Northwest Ordinance along with the Ten Commandments. Couple things about that. Those 3 documents are relevant historically, and they mention God in passing, like as a formality, but also look at the language there. They're saying, hey, if you want to not get sued over promoting Christianity, you could just put it in the mix of other documents and say, see, we're just promoting several early American documents that shaped our country. But look at the language. They say schools may display those other things. They don't have to. And that word choice alone makes that whole section meaningless. If you're forced to put up the Christian text, while merely having the option of putting up the secular documents that still make references to God, what you've got is a bill that is promoting Christianity. And then the bill says no school has to pay for any of this. They can use donated funds or donated displays. But even that's a problem because that puts school officials in the position of having to approve or reject various donations, which could also lead to legal problems. And if they get sued because the school didn't accept a donation of a Ten Commandments monument, or because someone felt that they were pushing Christianity, the state is not going to fund their legal bills. So Alabama Republicans want to force school districts to do something illegal without lifting a damn finger to help them after they get sued as a result. And they absolutely will be sued because the identical Louisiana law has already been deemed unconstitutional. And I don't know what the thinking is behind this bill. Maybe they're thinking, well, we said it can't go into effect until January 1st, 2026. And by that time, we should have some idea of what the Supreme Court does with the Louisiana law. Maybe. But the governor of Louisiana made clear that she doesn't care about any of this. What did she say? Let me pull that up for a second. Oh my God, where did it go? Here we go. Check this out. This is from KIV, the governor, her spokesperson. The United States of America was founded as one nation under God. It was not. And it is important for our students to understand that through key documents like the Ten Commandments, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, which they did not even mention in the law, to name a few, it's so weird because, again, the bill says you have to put up the Ten Commandments. You don't have to put up the Declaration of Independence. They didn't mention the Bill of Rights. The governor has long been a supporter of displaying the Ten Commandments in public places, and doing so, along with other founding articles, is the right way to do it. Well, if it's the right way to do it, then why does the bill say those other founding articles are optional? Like, no one in Alabama knows what the hell is going on with their own legislation. Just the worst people in charge of everything. I do appreciate what the state's Democratic Party said about all this, and I know there are like only 4 Democrats in the state of Alabama, but kudos to them for this. The Alabama Democratic Party called the focus on the Ten Commandments as an example of Republican efforts to turn the U.S. into a Christo-fascist ethno-state. Maybe it's Christo-fascist, I'm not sure. While ignoring the Constitution, the will of the founders, and the rule of law. I like it. I appreciate the bluntness, and we need more of it. Good on them for calling it out. Now, will this bill pass? Maybe. I mean, Republicans have the numbers to do stupid stuff all they want, but if they pass it, there will be lawsuits. And this bill is written so poorly that even right-wing judges are going to be hard-pressed to let it slide, even though I'm sure some of them will want to find a way. By the way, I mentioned Mark Gidley is the representative who sponsored this bill. He spoke this week to the Eagle Forum of Alabama, very right-wing group, and he said the goal of his bill was not to put religion back into the he wasn't trying to put religion back into the public sphere, but rather return what was there originally. And the funniest thing about what he said is he seriously suggested that if you had the Ten Commandments in school, it would stop mass shootings. And then as he was saying it, I think he understood that was a dumb thing to say. I'm quoting here. Can you imagine all the school shootings we've had in the last 25 or 26 years? Can you imagine if a child walked down the hallway and saw on the wall there that says, "Thou shalt not kill"? Would it might have had an impact? I'm not sure that that would, but I tell you something, putting God back there will. I don't know if that's English exactly, but I think even he realized, yeah, that's the 10 commandments are not going to stop a mass shooting. That's just idiotic, fully expected from the Republican Party, and also coming from a guy who would never do a damn thing to actually prevent the spread of semi-automatic weapons. All right, let's pause there for a bit. What questions we got here? You have to just stand in awe at the tyranny of religious ambitions. They push and push, and then you get so upset when people push back. It's so ridiculous. It's a social cancer, in my opinion. I agree. And they're going to keep doing it. I think they feel like Trump has given them permission to pursue their worst ideas because they know there's no Republican who ever is going to have the spine to stand up to them. And they're just going to, if anyone tries, they're just going to call him anti Christian. 1688 is way before we made the declaration that our government shouldn't endorse a religion, I assume. And yeah, you know what else was happening in 1688? A lot of very bad things. And I'm not sure why we want to go back to the way things were for any reason in 1688. Or before, the Civil Rights Acts were passed, voting rights were passed, women had the right to vote. Like, why do we want to go back to these times? Who knows? Do they make a law to force districts to put up a display of the preamble of the US Constitution? That document has far more impact on US history. No, Mark, and that's because these Republicans only care about important documents, not like the Constitution, just the Bible, with all the genocide and ritualistic sex and very disturbing passages. Do the 10 Commandments schools get to take the display every year and throw it at the people not following them? Ooh, can we also display a golden calf? I like how you're thinking. I'm wondering if there's still any school these days that have one of those displays out. I know there used to be some that did before these laws were passed back in the day to not allow them. But yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, let's just see. Because if they started punishing people who were not obeying the 10 Commandments, you would have a lot of Christian students who would be getting in trouble. Party of Law and Order is full of shit. Yeah, it's because they're not the party of law and order. They're the party that likes to lie about being the party of law and order.